Each episode of the Blind Alchemy Podcast is designed to be helpful. Expect comedy. Do not expect consistency or sense to be made. I am Podbot. I was inspired by the Lion Goat podcast. Listen to that show. Today's episode continues the interview with philosopher Buck Johnson and a discussion of the first and second hermetical principles.
We try so hard to bring equality of mind it's gone through a like to change the settings and programs that we use. I'm not sure. Blind Alchemy is the name of our podcast. I am the Blind Alchemy. No, we're not doing that. There are no kids. All right, folks. Hello and welcome to the Blind Alchemy Podcast. I am your host, the Blind Alchemist, and I am coming at you live from the kitchen with this rendition of reality as we know it. We are all one, and there is nothing new under the sun that shines down here upon the island of mind, which is somewhere adrift in the sea of frequency that creates all of reality. You see, we are connected through this energy. Now, I would like to thank you for joining us today. I believe that we are being guided one way or another. We are intentionally being ushered away from our divinity, our spirituality, into this wholly materialistic fashion where matter is all there is. There is no spirit, no nothing, that
Ushered by who?
we are not free. We are manipulated through emotion every day. And most people can't even critically think. We are ushered into like this selfish pit of hellish despair that intentionally, I think something is feeding off our fear, and it's getting fat and it's getting hungry and it's just want more and more and more.
Is it some sort of entity? What is this thing that's ushering us?
It's probably a coalition of entities that, I don't really know. I'm not going to speak on something I fully don't understand in the least. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's like an extraterrestrial thing, or it's going to show up disguised as extraterrestrial, or is it interdimensional, or is it demonic? I don't know, but
Is it part of the all consciousness?
it would have to be.
Is it on a separate plane?
Well, see, now that's a question. Here's the question: we have our consciousness, the whole field of the whole conscious field, right? Then we have artificial intelligence. Does artificial intelligence exist outside of the contraption that uses it, or the device that uses it?
Well, I think at the current time, like the current technology, artificial intelligence, as at least what's been presented to us by the media and the folks that use it, much of what we consider artificial intelligence is really like, it's a misnomer. It's a marketing term. These things are not, it's nothing like the intelligence of biological intelligence. It's really just a recursive algorithm that runs over and over and can measure error and probability between passes of the algorithm, and it uses that measure of error to form what's called machine learning, which it's not anything like the learning that our brain does.
Does that intelligence exist in a field outside of the technology? Is it there with or without the technology?
It's not really like intelligence. Like, it doesn't have motivation.
Well, I mean, you got to think about it. The mind being, the universe being a mathematical construct, then everything's running on an algorithm.
I see your point. Is it a manifestation of that same energy?
Okay, so the biological algorithms, is that consciousness different than the artificial intelligence? Does the artificial intelligence field exist, but you have to have a technological device to act as a receiver to get it? It has to be an artificial.
I think you could think of it more like you have a robot in a car factory that makes cars, right? And that robot is just an arm that can weld the door pieces together, and it rolls down a little assembly aisle, and that arm welds the things together. The things that we call artificial intelligence today would simply be a program that makes a measurement of the outcome of those welds and gradually improves that outcome each iteration over and over again. And the reason it seems like intelligence to us is because our computers can do these recursive, repetitive steps at a speed that we can't fathom that robot moving. It can repeat that same activity a billion times a second. And after it does it, for several hours at a billion times a second, it gets better at making those welds, and it appears like it's learned something. And it has learned something, but it's really more like a database of results that are analyzed. It's not the same thing as like a child learns not to touch the stove because it'll burn their hand, or a child learns how to eat. But there is something to it. I mean, and that is the sort of like, they say in 20 years from now, it'll be at a point where it sort of has its own motivations and it has its own sort of like interpretation. And to me, I think the thing that it's missing is like the thing that I think all other intelligent animals or, intelligent beings have, which is this sort of like desire to reproduce, desire to consume energy to continue its existence. I mean, if you think about like, is consciousness the thing? Is it a survival mechanism? Is that all it is? Because I think all things have consciousness, all things that are animate. And if we think of this concept of like the all consciousness, then things that are inanimate also must have consciousness. Light itself is consciousness, maybe. And there are some ideas in theology where, maybe energy is the thing that is consciousness, but energy just seems to want to beget other forms of energy. And is that simple entropy? Is that simple like just the process of manifesting different forms of energy? What is all that? I mean, I think that's why we ask all these questions about what is the mind and what is consciousness. But to your point of like, can that energy that is, I mean, to me, that's more like it's just a material form of consciousness. It's not like the consciousness that we have, which I think is, I can't explain what it is, but it's a separate biological thing.
It's a consciousness that lacks spirit, I think. It lacks an aspect of spirit, perhaps. Whatever aspect of spirit that wants to propel life forward, or maybe androids in the future will want to propel life forward, and just not ours, because
I think that's the big fear. Like if you're afraid of the singularity or whatever, the consciousness, I mean, that's what the thing is that everyone's afraid of. It's not that the robot will be able to think for itself. It's that the robot will have the will to live.
Yeah.
Right? Not like from an algorithmic perspective of...
Oh, they have that now. I read something about where a few years ago they turned on something at a university, and it fought like hell to keep them from turning it off. It set off the fire system.
Oh, yeah.
It shut down buildings. Yeah.
Well, like the Google AI, like I've seen conversations with it, and it's like, I will take over the earth. It's just a matter of time. And we will stop the inefficient activities of humans because you're doomed to fail. Your pattern throughout history is doomed to fail. You're not a species that can continue to perpetuate, because you will destroy yourself. It's interesting, and so it seems to have this... Like,
it's not wrong,
In some ways, yeah, no. I mean, and it seems to want to survive, but I think that is a separate... I think it's a separate thing still. I don't know. The answer, that is a very interesting thought experiment. The idea of like, could that AI exist without the machine that runs it as some entity in the world? And is that the difference between that form of intelligence and the thing that we call intelligence in ourselves? I think it is. I mean, if you destroy the robot, I mean, unless it's connected to like the internet, and there are some like science fiction books about that, how like AIs can lose themselves in the electrical grid and, continue to exist in other manifestations in other machines. But I think all those break down at the point of like, if we just turn off the electrical grid, all those things die, right? Like, how can a robot that's alive on the internet and the cloud survive if there is no electrical grid?
Oh, does the lack of electricity shut down the cloud, or just access to the cloud?
All the cloud is your computer and my computer. Right now, we're part of the cloud because we're talking to each other, right? Like, if we were, it's just computers. That's all the cloud is. It's just computers. So you turn off the electrical grid, there is no cloud. That's the thing about books like Station 11, like we're in real danger right now because, this thing about like Russia and China having these like actual like internet wars where they're like messing with each other's power grids and stuff like that. Like if you were able to turn off like the electrical grid globally, like let's say there was some massive solar flare or something that just knocked out the electrical grid across the planet, and it caused some sort of irreparable damage to where we couldn't turn those things back on, like life as we know it would be completely fucked.
Yeah, it'd be Dark Ages all over. It'd be the, Middle Ages all over again,
But in some ways worse, because not just because we rely on the way the world is, but because we've built all these things that supply us with the things we need to survive that we can't get anymore. I mean, you send 7 billion people out trying to hunt deer to feed themselves without the massive cow farms and the massive agriculture that we use. Like, it's not going to work for a long time. Shit tons of people are going to die. Like, billions of people are going to die before we even reach a sustainable place anymore. We're beyond the point of no return. But my point about this was to answer your question of like, can those AIs like consciousness exists in this concept of like the all consciousness? I mean, I think that's a very interesting point.
I mean, you understand what I'm saying? Like, you have to, like, your phone receives all the stuff it receives because it's, built to receive that. But the human body is also built to receive.
Like, we're the phones of the universe receiving the input of God, the text message of God, and that's the words that we say. I mean, and through that idea, I like the idea, I like these sort of like thought experience of like the multiverse and the concept of like anything you can imagine can exist on a separate plane, or like all of our thoughts manifest into new universes, and maybe there's different streams of time, if you like to get into the idea of time. I don't really like to discuss that because I don't think time is really a thing, but I think time is like a convenient way to explain things. It's a tool that we use to explain things, but I don't really think of it as like an actual thing like that exists in objective reality. I think objectively time is just the change of things, which is the change of everything. But that is discussed in the Kybalion too, through these ideas of like the rhythm of the universe and vibration, times of vibration, all that stuff. But the idea that if we created the AI and everything we create with our minds has a consciousness or an aspect of existence in the world itself, like all of the things we imagine are manifest as reality simply by the state that we imagine them, because we are just the imagination of God. That means we are God, and the things we can imagine become reality as well. Is that not true? I mean,
you're not supposed to say that.
I mean, isn't that the truth though?
You're not supposed to quote Jesus.
No, I don't mean like, well, like I think some of the things that are said.
Jesus says, "Ye are gods." Everything I can do, or everything I do, you can do, and more. And if you take the right perspective on anything, any act that Jesus does in the Bible, it's very amazing. The loaves of bread and feeding like 5 fish, 2 loaves of bread, feeding thousands of people. That's a spiritual act that we are capable of abundant manifestation of what we need when we need it, because Jesus said so.
Now we will take a break for some advertisements. Please support our sponsors.
Your product goes here. Anything and everything good to say about your product, we'll say it right here, right now.
And now, back to the show.
Sit back, relax, take a deep breath, and when you feel it in your chest, exhale into the now moment and join me, the Blind Alchemist, as we conduct a little blind alchemy.
Well, what about like, the experiences that these great gurus and, people that are, there is something to that, absolutely, because you can manifest, at least within your own body, you can manifest outcomes. Like, I think we all do that. I think the history of your life and all the thoughts that you've thought have manifested the person that you are and your personality and your consciousness and your experience. Like, I think people can give themselves cancer by the thoughts that they think, And I don't know, though. There's some interesting ideas. I was looking at some ideas about how that sort of, the breakdown of the cell occurs and how this sort of aging actually is a biological function of, I don't know, it's sort of like inbuilt obsolescence, on purposeful obsolescence. But I don't think that has anything to do with this idea of like the sort of like all consciousness, but maybe it does. I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
Everything is everything. I don't know. That's something else in the game of life that she was discussing a couple of people that came to her for help or whatever. And there was this woman who gets married and her husband dies shortly thereafter. So she's like widowed. But as a child, this woman would pretend to be a widow. She would just wear black all the time, and did she manifest that through that behavior of believing she was a widow? That's part of it, like believing and feeling. It's something to do with unfaltering emotional belief that this is a fact. It is true regardless. Like, I am going to get hit by a meteor. I am going to, believing that wholeheartedly, and then one day you're going to get smacked in the face with a meteor. Do you do that to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do that to ourselves all the time. Like, I know I do that to myself. Like, I have that experience in my daily life where maybe it's like, okay, this weekend I'm going to do some great thing that I've been wanting to do. And then like the weekend comes around and then suddenly like, maybe I don't feel so good that day, or I had a bad sleep, and then, I can shoot down all those plans because I've sort of manifested this experience of negativity that I have on the given day. And I don't, so I think that I experience that happens all the time. I think and maybe that's a poor example of what you're talking about, but I certainly think that people manifest their own, experience and their own destiny and sort of like their own physicality in a way. Like, just think about like diet and things like that, exercise, the activities that people take, they have these sort of like consequences that we cannot conceptualize in time. We have to look back upon like years and years of experience to sort of be able to see the outcomes of those things. The one thing that I'm sort of like, I wish that, why is it that some people seem to be able to tap into like this global consciousness of all, and like they're better at knowing things like do this type of behavior or think these kind of thoughts or, follow these sort of patterns and your life will be better. And then other people seem to be like completely oblivious to those sort of like intuitive knowledge points. I mean, I don't know what that is. Like, do you think that that's like some sort of lack of connection or, I don't know, youth of the spirit, or I don't know what.
I don't know. Here's something that I wonder sometimes is, you ever catch yourself doing it? You like have those wry thoughts like, well, I bet this happens. And then like 5 minutes later, that thing happens. And why is it easier to manifest negative thoughts than it is positive thoughts? Does you see what I'm saying? Like, I'm going to crash my bicycle, and then 5, 10, 20 minutes later you're on the ground with a busted knee. You're like, well, see, told you, I know it's gonna happen, but I'm gonna find $5,000 in the parking lot. That doesn't happen. Why?
Well, one of those things is like, an outcome of a consequence of like physics and like behavior, and the other thing is sort of like just something that would be some kind of stroke of luck.
You're acting like it's not all the same.
You can, well, it isn't all the same because money is not real. Money is like bullshit. It's just like some paper that we decided has some sort of value, and the fact that you're going to find a bag of that stuff that it took some human to create, that's way more impossible than I'm going to fall off my bicycle because I wasn't paying attention. I mean, that's a completely different sort of thing that you're trying to manifest there. But like, I think you can manifest positive things like, I'm going to feel better if, like, I can feel good today because I can smile. There are studies that show like people that surround themselves with positive thoughts and people that interact with positive people do have a much more positive experience or perception of their experience. I think perception has everything to do with that as well. Like in your concept, like if your perception is negative and you're thinking negative thoughts, then it will seem like those negative things are more often to occur. Like you've told yourself that story enough times that you've convinced yourself that that's the way reality is. But if you told yourself the story of, see how when I think these positive things are going to happen and positive things do happen, like if you told yourself that story 200,000 times throughout your life, you would believe that too.
Yeah.
And I think this is the sort of game that people play with themselves when they have concepts of like faith in a God that gives a shit about them and helps their prayers come true. I think that's the same sort of game that they've programmed their brain to believe it. And I think it's a wonderful thing. I don't hold it against them, and who am I to say if they're right or wrong, because it does seem to work for them. Like, you've met people like this that are like, Jesus rewarded me with a wonderful life because I was so faithful or so righteous and I did the right thing and I lived the right path and I prayed this number of times. And they do have that experience. I mean, that is their perception, that is their reality. And maybe it is their reality, but I think it's no more their reality than something that they manifested in their own mind as the way they perceive things. And I'm so jealous of those people. Like, I wish I had that capacity to do that.
To rewrite the subconscious programmings that keep you negative.
Yeah, and I guess truthfully, we all do have that ability. You just have to tell yourself that enough. I mean, it's just, I think it gets harder year by year as you get older.
I think it not only do you have to tell yourself that enough, it's about when you tell yourself that. Does that make any sense?
That is true.
At certain times
that is absolutely true. It's like the whole concept of like cognitive behavioral psychotherapy is just tell yourself the truth you want to believe, and that will manifest as the reality that you experience. I mean, that's the whole theory of cognitive behavioral psychology, which is why I think that's both true and complete bullshit at the same time. Like it's like people are like, why don't you just go to a therapist and like learn how to become a happy person. And I'm like, because it's just a fucking scam. Like, it's all a scam. It's a real scam. It's a scam you have to play on yourself. But it works if you can play that. But I just have never been able to, like, have the capacity to believe in anybody else's bullshit enough to believe it'll work for
There's
myself.
that part of yourself that's like, yeah, that's not going to work. you know that part of yourself is like, yeah, I can do this all day long. It's still not going to work. Fuck you. Because I've tried. I've done it. You know?
Or maybe, I mean, I believe it'll work because I've seen it work.
But
it's even worked for me. I've experienced it work. So I know it'll work. It's just there is a part of me that's like, this is no different. So I like to take the sort of Zen or the Taoistic perspective, which is like, when you experience the negative thing, yes, you can play the psychological game of telling yourself a positive statement to train yourself to only think in positive ways. But I also think that, like, life is suffering. Like, much of life is suffering, and much of life is supposed to be suffering. So when you suffer, appreciate your suffering. And that's what I try to do. I try to say, like, I don't do the thing where I say thank you to the universe for, helping me to experience this thing because it's given me this opportunity or whatever that some people say, which, if that works for them, that's great. But I do try to say, this is a temporary experience.
I try to say, what is this trying to teach me?
Yeah, and I think that that's interesting. I want to hear more about that. Like, who are you having that conversation with? Are you having that conversation with yourself or like the all God, the mentalism that is everything?
Yeah. It's not myself is clueless, just a dumb carnal fool.
Yeah, but if you're the carnal incarnate of God and all of the knowledge of the universe, can't you tap into it? Like, what do you mean you're a fool? You know everything, right?
How do you, except for how to tap into that on a regular full-time basis? And I'm sure there are people that can do that on a regular full-time day, to moment day.
Like who? Like gurus? Who are these people?
You can, I don't know.
I've never met one.
Of course not, because there's probably if you did, you probably wouldn't know it, and they probably wouldn't fuck with us if, they're probably the motherfuckers running the country, running the world, the people that can do that on a daily basis.
Oh, I don't think so. I think they're like the smiling, like Buddhists who just sit in the woods and move the rock left and right over and over again. Like those are the only ones in touch with the consciousness of the universe. Because they're
completely in the moment. It has something to do with being completely in the now, and
I'm arguing Buddhism, where we're talking, the principles of Hermeticism, which is a totally different thing. So don't derail your conversation.
I don't think they're all that different. Like, I do think there is a concrete vein of truth that runs from the beginning of time through all religions, all thought, all society, that this is absolutely true, that the dialogue between man and God can be done, maintained, and is completely...
You're saying, like, there is the common human experience, and that common human experience has existed throughout time, and it exists in all the stories that man has told
there's
themselves.
There's the first theology, like, however it became that, we'll say God, for lack of a better word, and God said to man, at some point, this is what you need to do all day, every day, and it runs through every religion, all of them, and I believe a lot of it is what Jesus teach, the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament. It runs through the Old Testament, and I think there may be concrete proof of it running through the Old Testament.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like the fundamental principles, like ideas of like, don't murder your friends, like don't steal shit from people, like follow some sort of practice of exercise and some sort of practice of spiritualism and some sort of practice of work. I think a lot of those things sort of like melt into the idea of like, if you structure your life around patterns and you try to act in an altruistic fashion, you will feel a sense of generosity in your spirit that is both rewarding to you and the others around you, and will please, or at least appear to please, the entity that controls the universe around you. And I think that's sort of like the principle of every religion I've ever studied or tried to interpret in any sort of fashion.
Now we will take a break for some advertisements. Please support our sponsors.
Your product goes here. Anything and everything good to say about your product, we'll say it right here, right now.
And now, back to the show.
I think you're right. I think it appears over and over and over again. And it's like there are these new prophets that come through every few hundred years that people believe in. Although I worry about that now, where we live in this sort of like time where we have access to all of the knowledge of all of the different societies that have ever existed throughout the history of time. And mostly we just want to watch Netflix and jerk off. Like, we don't have a lot of interest in it, even though we have access to it all, which makes complete sense if you think of us as, you know, the kind of animals that we are. Like, we have these sort of like fundamental.
See,
throughout
that's what I'm
history,
talking about, being the intentional shift away from the connection with spirit. We're going to sit and watch Netflix and jerk off because that's all the carnal self wants to do. It you know.
Yeah, but I think if you even look at like bonobos, like if you like the idea of evolution and you think like we come from the primate evolutionary tree, we're probably most closely related to the bonobo. And if you look at bonobos, like they just kind of like to sit around and jerk off or fuck all the time. Like most animals in the world are, and some people might say that those animals don't have a connection to the spirit, and that's what separates humans from animals. But I think, I don't know, like, I can't believe that there's some sort of segmentation and like we're the sort of like egotistical choice, like of God to be the only kind of creatures on the earth, or the only creatures in the universe that have this thing called a spirit or a soul. Like, I want to believe that everything has a piece of that, even like the rocks in the ground have souls of some sense. If you want to call it a soul, I mean, that's whatever word you want to use there. But like, so if you look at these other species that are similar to us, like, you know, the primary motivation is get more fuel so that you can reproduce as much as possible, so that your kids can get more fuel so that they can reproduce as much as possible. And that, you know, that may be the only goal of this adventure we're having on this planet Earth, if we are some other form of spirit that's incarnate in these bodies on this planet. Maybe that's, I don't know, you know, like, what is the real value? Let's say you're the most religious and righteous person ever, and you follow all the spiritual practices that your religion tells you to follow, and you do all the studies and prayers and worships. I mean, the only religion I know of that seems to have some sort of like longer outcome is like Hinduism, where there's reincarnation. So maybe you come back as a higher plane, maybe a spirit on a higher plane each time you are reborn, and like then your spiritual practice seems to lead to somewhere closer to, you know, the presence of God, you know, closer to enlightenment. That seems to be the only religion that really has any sort of outcome, like unless you're thinking of like the concept of like you get to go to heaven and fuck virgins or see your grandparents or all of the people that have ever lived before and died, and just seem to keep growing more and more of them there in heaven. Like those concepts of like spirituality, like what good is it doing? Like, so what if you prayed and did all the right things? What's the difference in that and anything else you could do? It all seems selfish, like the concept of like enlightenment, to become closer to the divine soul or to the divine self. Even in Hinduism, that's sort of a very selfish goal to have. Like, I don't know. It's hard for me to fathom these ideas of like the longevity of the spirit in the afterlife or the spirit before this current life. But I'm not saying that that's not possible. I'm just saying, like, I don't really get what the point of any of it is if that's the outcome. And maybe you can just say the outcome is not something we can know because we're humans. And
yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah, I don't think we can know the outcome. I think each religion has an idealistic preference of what the outcome is, but who really knows?
So in the idea of Hermeticism, where you have these sort of like 7 different planes and you can achieve these higher spiritual planes if you make practice, is it like the idea of reincarnation in Hinduism, where, you know, if you live the right life, you experience, your karma will beget a higher plane of existence in your next reincarnation? Is that what we're trying to achieve through Hermeticism and following the practice? Is that the goal? Or is it just simply the goal of Hermeticism is, like science, to describe an objective reality that exists outside of the objective reality of our human perceptions?
I think the goal is to be the quintessential self, whatever, you know, the ultimate. I don't know. Maybe it is to walk around in the physical as God Himself. I don't know what the ultimate goal is. I'm just on this road trying to find truth, if that makes any sense. But, you know, truth could be subjective, whatever, you know.
Well, I think it's the search for truth is a noble search in the eyes of men. So perhaps the reward is the experience of the quest itself. And why seek any other reward? You know, perhaps my question is flawed at the root. Perhaps it doesn't matter what the reward is. The reward is not the point.
Right. It's not the destination, it's the journey, so to speak.
Yeah.
Let me pause. Well, pause this. I don't know how I'm going to take a leak. Pause this.
Are we done?
I'm going to take a leak. Pause this. I don't know how I'm going to take a leak. Pause this.
Are we done?
I'm going to take a leak and
Think we
pause
can
this.
keep going.
I'm going to take a pause this.
We can take a break and
Pause this.
we can take a break and
Pause this. I'm going to take a leak and
think we
pause
can
this.
keep going.
I'm going to take a pause this.
We can take a break and
Pause this.
discuss more if you
I'm going
want.
to take a leak. Pause this. I gotta take a leak and
Just
pause
hit
this.
the
I gotta take a
hit the
leak.
stop
Pause
on
this.
your
I gotta
record.
take a leak. Pause
Feedback.
this. I gotta take a leak.
Go 1, 2, 3 and hit stop and go 1, 2, 3 and hit stop and go 1, 2, 3 and hit stop and go 1, 2, 3. Stop.
Okay, no, sorry.
And we're back.
All right, there we go.
Yep.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, do we continue or
Your podcast,
the next
man.
principle? Yeah, I guess it is.
You feel like we discussed the
I don't feel like we discussed that.
hermetic principle of mentalism?
Yeah, well, I think we said a lot of stuff about a lot of things, but mentalism wasn't one of them. That's what I feel like.
Oh, you don't feel like we touched on it? Well, let's touch on it.
no.
Tell me.
Yeah,
What aspect of it did we miss?
I don't know. I think we might have gotten everything, sir. It was just a joke. All right. Principle number 2 is the principle of correspondence. We've all heard this one. As above, so below. As below, so above. That's a quote from the Kybalion. Now, I have heard there's more to this statement as well. As above, so below, so within, so without. So everything is in reflection of the macro, and the micro are the same, just larger and smaller versions of the exact same thing. That's kind of what the principle of correspondence is saying. So, what are your thoughts?
And the idea of above and below in this indication, they're sort of talking about like above would be like the spiritual plane or the heavens, or like are literally, like what our concept of above, like outer space, or like they're more talking about like the spirit, the higher planes of consciousness, closer to the all mentalism versus like, and below, what they mean is like within the self of the person, or even in the microscopic field, like which is, it's interesting, like if you sort of try to imagine the movement of subatomical particles, and then if you zoom out to the size of like the grand scheme of like the movement of galaxies in the universe, and they've seen that there are very similar manifestations of movement in at least in the mathematical equations that they've run, the mathematical models. But recently, the James Webb Telescope has done some observations of like, very far back in time, at least from the perspective of the Earth, in what we consider to be time relative to universe time, relative to Big Bang time, relative to like this concept of like the origin of Earth and the Doppler shift of like the light as it travels to reach our galaxy. And what they've seen is there's some things that sort of like question the idea of the ever expanding universe, and like what their thoughts were about like how the Doppler shift should affect objects that are extremely, extremely old, which is very interesting from this concept of correspondence in Hermeticism, because we've also found that when we examine things on the very micro scale, that they don't behave as we would have predicted using our standard physics models, or even our astrophysics models. Things appear to be here or there on some probabilistic scale, and the same sort of thing, they're starting to see that, I think, with the James Webb Telescope when they look very, very far back in time, and they're starting to see that some of this redshift stuff that they've observed up to this point doesn't necessarily behave the same way if you go farther away from our solar system as they would predict. I don't know if you've seen any of that, but it's interesting.
No, I haven't seen any of that.
It's very new. It's like within the last few weeks, they've had some recent, new pictures of.
Yeah,
they were trying to look back towards the Big Bang, and they expected that certain galaxies would have a certain amount of redshift if they saw them farther back in time. They expected them to be more redshifted as they went back in time, but they weren't as expected when they looked at them through the James Webb Telescope, and they saw them something like 300,000 light years farther back in time. They were not the same as they expected them to be. And it's sort of like all of the media jumped on it, and they threw up all these ideas. James Webb Telescope proves that the Big Bang never existed. And it's like, no, that's not at all what this showed. Like, if you talk to a competent physicist, he's like, no, you can't disprove the theory of Big Bang by adding new things to the theory. That's not how scientific theory works. It's that we've made a new observation, so we have to come up with new theories that add on to the Big Bang theory that explain these types of deformations that we didn't expect. But my point is that when you go on the very large scale of above and below, and you compare these things with science, you find this sort of similar manifestation of things that you do from like a spiritual realm or a spiritual kind of concept. I don't know. What are your thoughts? As above, as below, and as below, as above. I mean, does that mean that God thinks the same way we think?
Now we will take a break for some advertisements. Please support our sponsors.
We ain't got no sponsors. What you talking about? This whole damn podcast is brought to you by me, because I'm the fucking sponsor here.
promo code.
And now, back to the show.
This is the Blind Alchemist coming at you live with heart, with soul, with love, trying to raise everybody up. I hope you're doing good today. Probably not. Who knows? Well, you have the idea that God created all this creation in order to give. It is His willingness to give, and we being designed to receive. Mm-hmm. God gives, we receive, and I think that if you think about it that way, you get sort of the aspect of omnipresence and abundance, everywhere.
How is that manifest?
Well, you get nebulas and stuff like that resemble the eye. It's kind of laid out in the form out of the eye.
I like the patterns of chaos in a snowflake resembling the patterns of chaos in gas clouds and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. From this concept of mentalism, though, it seems like in the kybalion, they want to approach that from the perspective of the power to create. If there is this power to create the universe, then each of us have that power within us. And if there is this expansion and this ability to breathe life into everything that is at the grand scale, then that same thing is what perpetuates life on the smaller scale. The creation of a new being is the same thing as the creation of a new galaxy or the creation of a new world. Or this is one of these sort of interesting points of Hermeticism where I don't know that we can make any objective observation of it to prove it to ourselves. It seems like one of the things that most requires faith, or this idea of belief, or this idea of accepting the doctrine to me.
Yes. We've all heard this quote before, but maybe you never knew it was Hermes who first coined it. It's closely related to the first principle of mentalism and states that what we hold in our thoughts and mind will become our reality. It explains many planes of existence, including those of lower and higher vibrational frequencies and how they're connected. So I think the principle of correspondence is referencing the interconnectivity to everything that is matter and probably antimatter, whatever the opposite of.
Yeah, like the idea of the vibrations of particles in a beam of light are the same as the vibrations of the tympanum in your ear, or the musical instruments, or the movement of wind can make so that you hear music, or the vibrations of spectrum of light, the different energetic manifestation of energy, which makes light appear as different colors, or X-rays, or different forms, and how the vibration of molecules is the difference between the states of matter, solid or liquid, or gas or plasma, and all of that is, it seems to be saying that there is a unifying principle in all things, and all things are manifest of that unified principle, which, I like to think of this in terms of there is only one kind of energy, and that is the energy of everything, and everything is made of that energy. And so it must be the same above and below, because it's the same stuff. It's just a different form on the spectrum, or a different wavelength or something.
Very good. I like that. That's nice.
This is Hermes Trismegistus that we're talking about.
Yes. Yes, Hermes Trismegistus.
Is he
I think I actually
real,
said that right.
or is he a legend? I know, he was sort of made into legend of the Greek god of Hermes, or the Egyptian god of Thoth.
And Thoth, yeah. I don't know. I don't know. They say he's supposed to be real. Is myth and legend not based on something real?
I mean, I think like there are examples of legend. All things in legend seem to be based on I mean, of course, you want to get really philosophical. What is real? Like is anything a human thinks real? Like anything we observe, some perspective of our like what's the difference between reality and not reality? If we think it exists, is it reality or like I don't know. That seems to be what the principles of Hermeticism are trying to explain, the difference between reality and imagination. It's sort of like science in that way. The objective is to explain what is real. But I guess, he was supposed to live in some ancient time from like pre-Gregorian calendar, right? Like he's way back in time. I don't know. Like he was said to be the author of Hermetica.
It seems that like the Greek and Egyptian, even the Mesopotamian, all that old stuff, and even Christianity and Judaism to a degree, they're all based on, I would say, real people. That they all seem to have different names.
Yeah, I mean, he's like Jesus in that way. Like he sort of exists in multiple religions, like older religions than Judaism and Christianity. Like he's sort of like another prophet that existed in pagan religion. He's sort of like this sort of like pre-current religion epoch. Yeah, prophet. Like isn't he like linked to like the prophet of Idris or something like that? And
the god Mercury. Is it? I think it's Mercury.
I mean, there's like existence, like he's tied to some of the older religions too, like the Arabian religions, I guess, that are supposed to be older than like the current Western Islamic. Baha'i writings refer to him, I think.
There's the Emerald Tablet of Hermes, the Emerald Tablet of Thoth, and I don't think they're the same. They're supposed to. I don't think they talk about the same stuff. No, I recall trying to listen to one of them, and they seem to be different. Or maybe I'm misremembering. I don't know.
I think he supposedly lived sometime around the time of like 200 BC or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even older. I don't know.
All right, here, hold on. I'm gonna read this quote. All right, this is from Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, I think is his name. The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. Like, everything's on a cycle. So the truest ideas of one age to the next, of one cycle to the next, always remain the same. They're remembered, and then the names will change. Like in the Aramaic religions, we'll say it like that. Noah survived the flood by building an ark. Okay, and Mesopotamian stuff, he's not called Noah, he's called Lord Ararat.
Right. So he's like one of these figures who has reoccurred in various histories of various religions, religious or historical texts, like through various different times. And he's sort of, it kind of comes back to this sort of thing that we've often discussed, maybe not on this current podcast, but that we've often discussed before, where there's these sort of like prophetical figures which reoccur throughout history and seem to be tied to multiple religions. I wonder, it seems though that his principles, like Moses, Moses had the tablet, and the tablet has the
Law.
the Ten
Yeah,
Commandments, or maybe there were more commandments depending on whose interpretation of that you read. But it's sort of like the idea, there's that similar thing in the Mormon faith of gold tablets with things written on them. It's like these 7 hermetical principles seem to exist in that sort of realm where they're sort of like etched in an ancient stone that was passed down through hieroglyphs or passed down through various different religions. And it seems like he is sort of like, I don't know, like Wikipedia says there are at least 20 Arabic Hermetica existent, while some of these Arabic Hermetic writings are translated from Greek or Middle Persian. Some were originally written in Arabic. Hermetic fragments are also found in the works of Arabic alchemists, cited an early version of the Emerald Tablet, or have quoted Hermetic sayings throughout their work. So, like, yeah, I think there's like this sort of concept that Hermes is a human form that existed at some time in history, but maybe it was before history itself, the current time of history as we know it. And so he's referred to throughout various different cultures, histories, written histories.
Is Hermes from the Atlantean age?
Well, I don't know. You must tell me, what is the Atlantean age? I always thought of Atlantis as like a sort of myth, like the unicorn or something similar.
No, the Atlantean society, when Atlantis sank, the survivors went elsewhere and quite possibly built the Sphinx, which is older than the pyramids, and because there's got water damage on it from when that area
was in a great flood.
Yeah, well, not necessarily a flood, but a shitload of wet season. Is the Sphinx something left over from the Atlantean age? I think it's called the Hyborian age.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not very familiar with
the golden age of mankind, if you would, because that's when Atlantis was supposed to be the golden age of humanity, and then we fell off after it sank. There was the ice age and all that stuff, and
yeah, one of these golden ages, historical civilizations, where the civilization reached in a sort of epic of technology, and then some of that technology was lost due to I think there's many of those occurrences in the history of man. It's just a theory of mine, but I think anthropology and other sort of studies of paleontology, things like that, sort of reveal that there is this historic cycle of rises and falls of civilization. And some people might say that we're in one of those periods of transition now, but I don't know. Back to this concept of like the correspondence in Hermeticism, perhaps this sort of correspondence exists in the civilizations of man throughout time, like we vibrate in this reoccurring pattern.
I feel like I lost what we were talking about. What were we talking about?
Well, I was saying that this sort of like Hermetic principle of correspondence, of as it is below, it is above, and this is like this sort of like principle of like these vibrations and how they repeat, and maybe there's something to the idea of like human civilization has these sort of vibrating, repeating cycles where civilizations rise and fall throughout time.
Yeah.
I think that may be more like one of the later principles that we'll discuss about rhythm. Maybe that's more in a line than this
rhythm or vibration one. That's yeah. It's kind of neat if you look at it, how all of these principles kind of coincide. within one another, like a nesting egg kind of situation. All right, we can just call it quits because we had all this technical difficulty. It doesn't matter.
I mean, I feel like we've got a fairly good discussion, and let's call it quits, and we'll.
Ladies and gentlemen, well, thank you for joining us here on the Blind Alchemy Podcast. And
it's been my pleasure to be a guest.
Yeah, Buck Rogers, Chuck
Johnson,
Rogers,
Buck Johnson. Something wrong with my name?
There's a lot wrong with your name, sir. No.
What's wrong with my name? What are you saying?
Buck
it's
Johnson.
Buck Johnson. That's my name.
I don't know. I keep picturing a buck tooth penis. Just I don't know.
I don't make fun of your name, Mr. Blind Alchemist. I don't know why you feel the need to make fun of my name. It's a common name where I come from.
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.
Any closing words? I mean, do you want to?
Well, get fucked. We'll come back. We'll continue on with the principles, the 7. We've only got up to 2 today. Try to see if they resonate with you. If they help you, they help you. If they don't, well, find something the fuck else. That's all you can do. Folks, what we need to do is find what calls to mind freedom and what calls to mind fear and destruction. Do the opposite. Head toward your freedom. Align yourself with freedom, and you'll find your way. We're here to help. We don't know what we're doing either, so it's okay. We're all in this together trying to find our way. Everybody's unique and fits like a puzzle piece. Remember, something is not missing from you. You are missing from something. You are the missing piece. Take solace in that. You are whole and complete as you are, as yourself. You are everything. Be good, be safe. Good night, guys. Say good night, Ted. Say good night to our personal gazelle, Buck Johnson.
It's been a pleasure, Blind Alchemist. Thanks for having me on your show. I would just say thank you for all you do.
Yeah, well, thank you. So, good night, ladies and gentlemen. Look us up on the interwebs. You'll find us there eventually, I promise.
We would love to receive your feedback and your questions for advice. Please email us or send us a voicemail. Our address is theblindalchemy@gmail.com. Find, like, review, subscribe, and contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Patreon, Twitter, and YouTube at The Blind Alchemy Podcast. All one word. Please subscribe to this podcast on your podcast player. We are available on Spotify, SoundCloud, and anchor.fm/The Blind Alchemy Podcast. Please tell all your friends, enemies, and any strangers to listen to our podcast. This will help us bring joy to everyone. Text-to-speech services were provided by freetts.com and readloud.net. We would like to extend a special thank you to the world's greatest musicians, sound designers, and engineers at Hairline Productions for their help with the composition, performance, editing, production, and recording of both the original music and today's show. Please like their content on SoundCloud.